Hey, welcome Talent Warriors to another episode of the Talent War podcast with myself, George Randle, and PhD in all things talent and multi-time CHRO, Mr. Tom Lokar. And today is one of those episodes you really want to tune into and listen to. We're going to talk about executive blind spots. We are going to talk about executive coaching. It's something most people don't really want to talk about. When you do, when you don't need a coach, what a coach can do for you, what a great mentor can do for you, because one of the things we're going to get into is the Peter Principle, and we're going to talk about that here, so stay tuned. All right, Tom, welcome back for another one of our fun episodes. We've been told what jokes to tell and what jokes not to tell and avoid so that people stay listening to two HR people.
You know, now that we have thousands of listeners, do you think we can start off with more personal stuff versus nerding out on HR? I mean, you scored 5 goals in 2 soccer games this weekend, and the Tour de France started off in crashing, chaotic, cataclysmic awesomeness with 3 great winners in Alaphilippe, and then Mathieu van der Poel pointing up to the sky to his grandfather who never got to wear the yellow jersey. He actually thought he earned the yellow jersey, and that night they came to his hotel room and took it from him and gave it to the person who actually had beat him on time. And so Mathieu goes in on a double loop of the Mur de Bretagne, takes the bonus points on the first time around because he needed those, then wins the stage and gets the next bonus seconds, not bonus points, bonus seconds, and edges out Alaphilippe to take the yellow jersey from him. Awesome. And then crashing upon crashing, people falling in the streets. Caleb Ewan going down the finish yesterday behind a couple of lead outs with Sagan. They were sort of elbowing or leaning into each other, and Ewan touches the wheel of the guy in front of him and just slides right under Sagan. But Sagan is such a badass. He just slides on top of Ewan, pops up and walks away. Ewan breaks his shoulder. He's out of the Tour. And, you know, out of nowhere today, stage 4, the man who wasn't supposed to make a comeback, the man who wasn't supposed to be in the Tour, Dakuna Quickstep, was going to go with their Irish kid, Sam Bennett, who'd been winning the green jersey the last couple of years and winning all the sprints that he entered. Mark Cavendish, the Manx Missile, whatever they call him, comes back after 5-year hiatus from the Tour and wins his 31st stage, now only 3 behind the legendary Eddie Merckx. Tears, goosebumps, a frickin' awesome Tour other than the crashing and some of the favorites being, 40 seconds to a minute behind the leaders.
Yeah, I saw the crash from the other day, and I actually saw the corresponding article where they're actually going to sue the spectator now. Finally, the French government is taking some action, because if you saw the crash, the person held up a sign for their grandparents, wasn't watching the race, was looking at the camera for their 3 seconds of fame. And I think they dropped 5 riders from that one crash. And you know what? I've seen small groups crash. And, I've been in a small breakaway that's, a couple people have tumbled, but I've never seen the Peloton come down like that. That was the first time I'd seen that live.
Well, and there's a subtle thing here that happened that day, and some of the news outlets have played tricks with their editing room. So that crash happened.
Really? That happens in today's modern media?
Yeah,
they play tricks with what they're telling you?
Even Fox News. So a bunch of the riders did go down after Tony Martin and the Jumbo-Visma team toppled on top of each other after hitting that sign. And there's no way they're going to find that spectator or sue them. That's just French saber rattling. The French, how the French protest. They stop work, but nothing ever changes. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to pick on the French. Later in the stage, with about 11K to go, a worse crash happens than that. In the middle of the peloton, a biker goes down. They're heading downhill. They're at 65 kilometers an hour. That's when the majority of people hit the deck, and you see them crashing into the gutter and spreading out across the field. So they keep showing that footage and saying it's the sign footage, which happened way earlier in the race. There were 2 crashes that day. Both, honestly, if you look at the pileup from the second one, it's actually worse than the sign person. But then again, for no reason, just other than narrow Brittany roads yesterday, there were crashes, and Primoz Roglic, one of the favorites, went down. I saw his Instagram post. Dude, he is bandaged up from head to toe. He finished the stage. He raced today, but tomorrow is the time trial. And both of his elbows, because he went on down on that chip seal tarmac that you and I know so well here in Texas, which is a combination of they lay oil down and then these pebbles, and then they mat it down, and then over time, cars roll over it and mat it down further. We call it chip seal. It's the most uncomfortable surface to ride a bike on, even a mountain bike. It rattles the family jewels like nobody's business. So he got shredded by that. Now he's got to do a 27-kilometer time trial leaning on his aero bars, all of this torn up skin.
One word for him, tramadol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it any other way, but
I think they test for that, George. We don't test at the Talent War group, so yeah.
Yeah, we don't test in the Austin Men's Soccer League either. But hey, I did do something that I haven't done in over a decade. My first game, got a hat trick, 3 goals, and left foot, right foot, header. Got one of each in the first game, which I'm not supposed to be using my noggin because there's only 2 marbles knocking around up there with all the concussions I've had. And then we went into the second game, which was a little bit of a rout, but man, oh man, it was just so hot. But it's good to be getting back out on the field. And I want to assure our listeners that this isn't corporate entertainment media, and you're getting the real life truth all the time. This is not edited in any way for your comfort or dining pleasure. Wanted to make sure we said that.
I thought 2 weeks ago you had the Gordie Howe hat trick, but on the pitch. You had a goal, an assist, and a fight. You punched a guy, an actual amateur adult. You hit him in the face, didn't you?
Hit him in the sternum. I got a yellow.
You bloodied him up. Tell me
instead of a red. No, I didn't. Yeah, punching in the face gets you a 3-game suspension, so I didn't try that. Yeah, we were in a wall, and the guy's trying to move me around, and he's, worse than chip seal. He's kidney punching me. I'm like, come on, jackass. That's enough of that. So, and I had warned the ref, so it's kind of fair game. He was pretty ticked off because I had burned him a couple times. So, I get it. He's a defender. He got torched. Get over it. But I guess we should talk about something HR. But damn, the tour is good this year. It's awesome to watch. And tomorrow I head out to Colorado. So I'm hoping to get a few miles in at altitude. So that should be fun.
Great. I look forward to hearing about it.
Probably. There's one hill out there. I think it's like a 16% grade for 2 miles. And I try to do it. It's kind of my fitness test. I wish I could regenerate a lung because, even in my climbing gears, it's still lean over the handlebars and pray for 2 miles. So,
well, you have a couple of roads over there by the Arboretum, on the other side of 183 across from Cat Mountain. Because the last time I worked down there, I brought my bike with me, and my Garmin was registering 15 to 17% as I was climbing this road. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But, man, you've got some steep, punchy climbs in Austin, but they're not at elevation, so that helps.
It's a good test of fitness. You get a little bit of sun, so it's kind of nice. And thank goodness the listeners can't see me now because I'm pretty red-faced from the soccer games. But I guess we should talk about something HR-related. And we were going to talk about executive coaching and the Peter Principle. So those of you not familiar with the Peter Principle, my basic version is that ultimately everybody is promoted to their level of incompetency. And so you only find out when you've tapped out or you've capped out.
Or you start a podcast.
There we go. That's true. Yeah, we've capped out, folks. This is it. That was good.
This is it. This is the pinnacle of our career.
So, yeah, it is. It is. But it's interesting, Tom, because, I was married to an executive coach and she's retired. And I always knew about this executive coaching stuff, but I never really understood in my mind the only time that well, first of all, before I get into the times, because I always thought it was for somebody who's underperforming, if you had to tell people what is an executive coach, how would you put it?
My version of it, and again, that's how we do this podcast, is I don't go into some manual or, in fact, behind me is the executive coaching handbook that's produced by I think it's the Harvard Business Review. Anyway, we've been using it as a resource guide just to help with our practice. So, there's a whole set of definitions around executive coaching, and it's bled over into a whole other set of areas like life coaching. And I see a lot of people on LinkedIn posting executive coach to venture capital, coach to this type of leader, this type of group, people who were executives, and now they're executive coaches because they worked as executives. And I guess that's all fine. I mean, I know lots of PhD psychologists that aren't necessarily great communicators and probably wouldn't be great coaches. And I don't know where I rank myself as a coach, but to me, an executive coach is someone that can sit with a leader and talk them through the 360 of their leadership style, their personality, their approach, bring it into the context of their job, and then identify ways that that person can leverage their strengths within the job context, whether it's leading a team, leading a business unit, leading a company, their first management experience, and also, help them take a look in the mirror, either through assessment tools or through the coaching process, which we'll talk about probably later in terms of how do you enter into a coaching scenario and how do you exit and what are some of the best practices that we like around that, that I like around that. But I think that coach is the person that can help you, the leader, look in the mirror and not necessarily, wrestle with strengths, because part of my interview process is, and I think a lot of people's interview process is, you ask a job candidate or you ask a coaching candidate, give me an idea what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. And a lot of people, honestly, are pretty good. With a little self-awareness, they can pretty much hone in, especially when they know they're sitting across from a coach who's a professional, either a psychologist or, a seasoned executive coach. They're pretty honest about, their strengths and weaknesses. And filling those gaps are important. But I find that the best coaches get their client to look beyond that and to get at those blind spots. The thing that the Hogan assessment tools used to call derailers, I don't think they call them derailers anymore. I think they PC'd that language up, but I still like the idea of derailer, blind spot, which is often, it's something you just don't see, like literally the definition of a blind spot. You just don't see it. You're not aware of it. It doesn't come into your frame of reference and you miss it in that context. It could be a tone in the way you talk to your team. It could be the way you write an email. It could be, I'm working with someone right now, really got capability at seeing the big picture, thinking through the strategy, and even being fairly detail-oriented in analyzing problems. But they struggle to get to the right conclusion. They end up either, one, admiring the problem and the data too long, or they're aware of the details, they're aware there's a forest, and they're aware that, hey, I know what the forest looks like above, but they don't take the assumptions and draw the right conclusions and end up, either stalling or making a bad call. That's a blind spot, and that's something, I'm helping her, work through. And I think an executive coach is that person holds up the mirror and helps the person leverage their strengths and work on their blind spots so that they don't become derailers. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do with a person, because everyone has good qualities and bad qualities, because we're humans and that's human nature, I'm trying to really round that person out and take them to the next level of their leadership potential.
I think that's really, really great for our listeners, because, one of the challenges is there's two really big challenges that I've observed, when I've been working with executives. And number one is it isn't what they know that gets them in trouble. It's what they don't know they don't know. So I think an executive coach filling those gaps and seeing what's possible. And then the other thing, and look, I'm guilty of this. I mean, when I was coming up through the ranks, the time in the military helped me a little bit, but I still had that ego when I was that young buck, that young officer, or, that young manager. And I was like, oh my God, the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, they got it so easy. I mean, they're making millions of bucks, blah, 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 blah. As I moved up the ladder, one of the things that was just this real big learning moment for me, and I'll use the last CEO that I worked with. Talk about a fishbowl to be living in. I mean, it was the most amazing. It was 24/7, 365. You're never off work. You're either selling, you're fixing, you're solving, you're leading, you're coaching, you're directing constantly. There is almost no time for self-reflection. I mean, now a lot of CEOs and C-suite executives have to bake that in, but I think that's one of the things that I learned about a great executive coach, and when the executive takes the opportunity, is it gives them a chance to step out of that fishbowl for a while and actually get something that's for them.
I think the interesting observation you make there, because whether you're a functional leader, a division leader, the head of sales, the CFO or the CEO or the COO, you're part of an executive team, and certainly we know this about the CEO, but it happens, it trickles down. It's lonely at the top. And sometimes you're so busy trying to legitimize your leadership and make sure your team, believes you're credible. And I'm a huge believer in this idea of trust, and that leaders people need to know you're competent. People need to know you've got a good brain for making decisions and analyzing the industry and the business. And that foundation culminates in this sort of trust factor that teams are looking to have in their leader. And once they have that trust can then, spread its wings or its veins out to the rest of the team. And the team forms trust bonds between them. And the leader then can spend more time, removing roadblocks versus having to coach, direct, and, manage the team. But once people have that trust of you and know that you're competent, you can be very effective. But getting there and sort of doing it in this bubble that you reference, and doing it sort of, without a lot of support systems, because the expectation when you step into those roles, I got this. I'm the head of HR. I should know what I'm doing, And this is my, third or fourth swing at the CHRO bat. I don't know if it's my nature or just my drive for achievement and wanting to be successful in the context of the business, which is helping this leadership team and this company grow and helping my team grow and helping my team impact the business. I have doubts. So, George, for the first time in starting a job, I hired my own executive coach. Coming off of the Mitel experience, a little time off, and doing the consulting work, I felt like I needed a support mechanism so that I wasn't alone in the bubble, that I could be alone in the bubble in the day-to-day, but I had this, once a week, hour to 2 hour discussion with my exec coach on things I was observing, things I was feeling, things that I wasn't feeling, and ways that I could be tackling, the relationship with the CEO, the relationship with my colleagues, the relationship with my team, the relationship all the way down into the organization. And so that really resonates with me in terms of why an executive coach is valuable, because it is lonely in that bubble. And sometimes you never step out of it unless you step out of it and take stock of where am I at as a leader. And, some people have been developed through, leadership programs, high potential programs to do that. A lot of people haven't. And so they think, well, shoot, I was given this opportunity. I'm the expert at sales. I got to be the best at this. And if I'm not the best at it right out of the gate and I'm not doing it on my own, I'm a failure. That's just not the right perspective, and I think we have this on the agenda to talk about, but, coaching for high potentials to me is one of the most important things you can do. Coaching for anyone is a great thing. Companies have limited resources, so sometimes there's that line that's drawn on, do we provide coaching for our high potentials? And then, there's a fair amount of coaching for what I call reclamation projects, which I don't know. I've taken on those gigs and I've done them, but that may not be the best use of executive coaching. There's probably some company coaching that should have happened before that. And now the fallback position is, hey, Tom, hey, George, can you help save this person?
Yeah. And that was a lesson learned for me. There was a period of time where I thought an executive coach was brought in and they were 90% reclamation, projects. And that's simply not true. It's absolutely the reverse of what I thought years and years ago. And, what I've seen, and look, in complete disclosure, I think one of the great things that, working with the people at the Talent War Group, our learning curve is, just constant and continuous. And I realized that there was so much about getting into business for ourselves and bringing, what we have to market. I would have hired my own coach too, because there were a couple things that they were just foreign to me. And I had this in my head. I think I'm doing it right. I think I know where I'm going on public speaking. I think I know where I'm going on, working with complex clients. And I think what clicked with me was getting a coach is just a way of getting better. And, sometimes, when you talk about reclamation, before we get to our process, I want to talk about some success stories and some other challenges. But I had heard a story and I watched what was supposed to be a reclamation project, salvaging these executive because he was going to be shown the door. But the reason they got him a coach wasn't because necessarily he was failing. It was because they were very, very confident that this person just had the blind spots. They saw the potential. It was their first time in a vice president role, what we consider senior executive, meaning, there's multiple levels of executives, really hitting that L2 level, one click off the C-suite. And they just knew that there was so much more to this person. And so the investment that the leadership team made, it was part reclamation, but it was part helping this individual going, what worked for you as a senior manager and senior director is not going to work for you at the vice president level. And so I think that was a big thing is, what got you here is not going to take you to the next level. And the executive levels are completely different than what most people think.
Well, you got arrows coming at you from all angles, right? When you get to the VP level, you're above the middle of the first line and second line leaders. You're leading leaders. You're leading a function or in our world of HR, you're probably leading a group of HR people or a COE. You're getting arrows from all angles, sideways, up, down, and just the email traffic flow because of all those arrows. And the meetings and the calendar, it gets very quickly, managing in that matrix of requests gets very challenging if you're not ready and if you're not thinking about your role holistically, like how am I going to help my team be successful? It's very easy for that new executive in that role to get pulled into the email traffic, the calendar invites, and then they lose the sense of who they were as a leader that made them successful, and they're now managing to others and singing other people's music, playing other people's music instead of their own. And that's where an executive coach can help, I characterize it like this. I'm probably the only person that I know of, the John Elway effect. John Elway used to talk about, I think he's the first athlete I remember talking about the game slowing down. And so a coach can slow the game down for an executive and help them stay in the moment and stay present and focus on what they control, while still being strategic and, future oriented, because nothing we do is for just today. Everything we're doing is always in a company building toward that execution of the strategy. So each day, each piece of work, each meeting, each interaction builds to some sort of output in the future. And when the game starts speeding by you, an executive coach, as we said earlier, George, can help you step out of the bubble and not pause the game, but slow it down and help you get quiet inside, which I think is one of the most underrated, underappreciated elements of leadership. We've focused a lot on, over the past 20 years, on EQ and self-awareness. But I think staying quiet inside when the world around you is echoing loudly, staying quiet, calm, and focused on what you can control and influencing where you can influence, and, not being passive. That doesn't mean you're not standing up for things you believe in or pushing your team or pushing back on a senior executive or a colleague. But when you do that, getting to that quiet moment where you're calm, and an executive coach, the good ones, that's what they can help you do more often than not. Heck, that's what the good therapists do, the good family therapists, marriage counselors. That's how they help you be successful. You find that quiet space inside where there isn't the shouting and the anxiety and the anxiousness to make a decision or do something, and you see everything, like John Elway used to talk about, and everything's moving past everyone else very fast, but he sees that pinpoint opening where the ball can go, and he makes the play.
Before the receiver gets there.
Right. Before the receivers turn their head.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you make a great point on being able to detach. And when I had my first coach, and he contributed to our book, Bill Gardner, and one of the interesting things was, I will move at Mach 2 with my ass on fire. And so when I moved into the executive ranks, if I got 250 emails and my previous volume as a senior director was 100, I was going to get all 250 done. And to your point about slowing it down, he gave me this great phrase as he said, I want to pull you out of the flow of the river so you can see what's value added. He said, because as an executive, there's so many demands on your time. There's so many emails. I mean, you're in the 2 line, you're in the CC line, you're BCC'd, you have these hallway conversations, and there's just so much volume. The real genius of a great executive and the coach that helps them pull them out of that flow is, what is the best and the highest and best use of your time as an executive, because that's where you're actually limited, is by your time. So I'm going to throw something out at you. So I didn't prep you beforehand, so I'm throwing this out there. What do you think makes a good coach? If you were going to tell people what to look for, what are the things that you would tell them? Because honestly, look, not to disparage anybody out there, but there's so many people saying that they can do that to be a coach. It's just not true. It is very difficult, and it requires a very special person, I think, and one dedicated to becoming better and better versions of themselves before they try to make better and better versions of others. But if you had to narrow it down, what would you be looking for, or what do you look for when you get a coach for yourself?
Yes, there's a couple of things here. I'll start with, as a former chief talent officer who's hired executive coaches into their company for hundreds of VPs and up, literally, at AOL, Time Warner, HP, Mitel. It's really important for me that I have a diversity of coaches and coaching styles that I've worked with. So I will know who to call when I have a reclamation project. I will know when I need the velvet touch. I know who to call when I need the white gloves and someone who's got a lot of C-team experience. I will know when I need my best coach for working with a new executive. And even saying that, I always tried to give the candidate, it's never a good word for the coachee, doesn't ever work. It's the candidate or the client, I guess the candidate, the executive, the opportunity to have a first meeting with that coach to see if there's a fit. You can't get change through someone else if there's a clash or a lack of fit. You don't have that trust, because a coach ultimately becomes the leader. They become the leader of your personal development. God, I almost said personal development journey. These people who are all on a journey. I'm trying to de-journey my language, and
just make sure that you're not woke too.
Right, because I woke up on a journey. And anyway, that coach is going to lead you through that development cycle, and there has to be a good fit. Now, I think back to the question at hand, and what you're really asking me are qualities of good coaches. And I just gave you a list of 4 or 5 in the executive coaching handbook that's sitting behind me. There's probably 12 different types of coaching interventions. There's probably 40 different competencies, characteristics that make up a good coach. So for me to narrow it down, I think this is going to sound cliche, but I want someone who listens and listens and listens before they draw conclusions. So, whether they're using assessment tools or their own technique of dialogue or, Socratic open-ended questioning, I want someone who doesn't jump to conclusions. Now, sometimes, in those reclamation coaching projects, you actually have data. Maybe even the company provided you with incidents or performance reviews or a 360, and they're saying, look, we had a high potential. We put them in this job. We think we promoted them too early. They're flaming out. We think the issue is indecisiveness. Can you get in there and help them? And even with that, you have to, as an executive coach, step back and test the assumptions that it's indecisiveness. And then you find out, George, it's not indecisiveness. It's a fear of failure. And now you're into something much more fundamental to this person's human nature. And you're working on the real thing that's going to help them break through. And it's not an overnight process. And some, sometimes they don't break through. You can only get them so far. So that's one, listening before they jump to conclusions and making sure with some form of assessment or data analysis. And like I said, it doesn't have to be assessment tools. I prefer them because I prefer a broad range of assessment tools, not one personality tool, not one cognitive abilities tool, not one management styles tool, but a couple of them, so that coupled with an intense interview gives me a decent picture. And then I can get past, some of the first impression assumptions I might make as a coach, which is, we're human too. Human nature is to make quick assumptions. And then you're still testing that visual that you paint for that person about them and whether they feel like that's them and whether they can own some of the things that you're saying are blind spots, strengths, and weaknesses. The second thing I think that makes a great coach is willingness to give the person a couple of nuggets, things to test out, and come back to you and say, hey, how did that work? Did you try that? What happened? Or even being able, if you have the opportunity to observe the person in real time, so that you get some credibility with them that, hey, you know what? Tom gave me this tip, minor thing. It's not the major part of my development plan. It actually worked. But I think of it a lot like, working with a CEO in a new role as a CHRO is find a couple of quick wins with the candidate to give them confidence that they can implement something and make change in their behavior. I don't tackle the big things. I wouldn't tackle the anxiety or the fear of failure type of thing or the oppressive authoritarian leadership style with a simple nugget. That's more long-term dialogue. But I think that's something that makes a good coach is they give the person a little nugget to test something out and some confidence that they can make change and do something different. And then, I guess this is not the final thing, but I'm curious to hear what you think makes a great coach, because you've had one and you've worked with one in your life for a long time. So you've watched someone in the profession be very successful at it. But that is, evolving the assessment, evolving the learning on your client. So I never try to get stuck. I'd never allow myself to get stuck with that assessment data, either through interview or whatever the client handed me or whatever interaction we've had. I never try to get stuck in that as my stereotype of that person. Well, you remember you were always that way, I try to evolve with them as they're changing and find new ways to influence them and bring value to them. And, it's one of the things that, my coach, David Selchin, I've really appreciated about him understanding me is he never stops. He goes back to what we were working on. How did that work? Where are you at? And then we evolve. And it's been a powerful impact on me evolving my leadership role here in the company. But it's been his approach that's allowed me to do that. And he's never gotten stuck. And he knows me for a long time. We're friends and colleagues. So he could paint me pretty accurately in about 5 minutes, but he never allows that to happen. He's always working real time with what I'm presenting. And I think this is, look, in behavioral health and psychiatry and psychology, it makes a great therapist is working real time. And look, if you see a client getting stuck, George, I think you absolutely have to say, hey, wait a minute. Hey, stop. We're back at this again. Remember, we talked about, you not getting into analysis to paralysis. But here you're doing it right now in this moment. And so sometimes you have to go back, but it's a constant interaction and learning between the coach and the candidate. I think the bad coaches want to get through and get something done very, expediently. They want to feel the reward of making a change. And there's probably a couple other things bad coaches do. I haven't made a career of evaluating and identifying bad coaches like I have bad real estate agents. I probably have a longer list of bad real estate agents than I have coaches. But, I think there's some coaches get wanting to move too fast and move on to the next thing, and they get painted in a corner with their client. Frankly, I've seen this as a hirer of coaches. They stop getting behavior change and thought change in my executives. And I'm like, you know what? I think we've reached our time. We need to find something else for this person.
I've had a lot of coaches, obviously married to one. For me, the thing that was really distinguishing, and this is me personally, of the coaches that I've worked with, is number one, they were able to do it in a very neutral way to make sure that I was open to improvement and open to feedback. And you had a good way of kind of pressure testing me to see how much, I was willing to confront, to get a good idea, to know if I was going to be a good use of their time as well. There's so many people out there that will just take the work. But this one that I worked with, he was like, look, this is important for both of us. And I want to make sure that, we can work together. So I appreciated that they weren't just, hey, I'm going to be here, I'm going to deliver work. Whoever's paying the bill's paying the bill. If they weren't confident that I was going to get something out of this, they were out of it. Meaning they were in it for my wins. The second thing was...
That's an excellent point. I should have made that, but I couldn't agree more. That's probably a more important point than the first three I made.
No. And the other thing was he would always lead me to the river. And it was the differentiator. There were a couple that I've worked with, but this one in particular, his name's Bill Gardner. He's fabulous. I mean, he just got this way about him that I just have not seen it any other way. It's why we asked him to be in the book, but, he's the first person that so many will recommend, but wonderful man, wonderful human being, exceptional coach. But he would lead me to the river. And he would say, okay, here it is. And then it's really my option whether I want to take those learnings, if I want to go wading in just the shallow end, the deep end, how far do I want to go? But he was there. And, he could lead me to the deep part of the river, the shallow part, whatever he thought I was ready for. He just had this innate sense about him.
I love the river analogy because wouldn't everyone like to know if they're traveling down the Amazon where the alligators are, where poison spiders are, where the natives are restless and pointing a spear at you? Wouldn't you like to know that? I think that's what an executive coach does. They help you navigate the river and see ahead what might be coming and prepare you for those eventualities.
It's a good point, because I know you and I have both done that with the people that we work with. Is you and I have traveled down that river enough times that we've run into the alligators and we've got the teeth marks and the scars from that. And, we don't ever walk up to a client and say, don't do this or go this way or go that way. We say, hey, as you navigate this part of the river, these are some of the things that you have to be mindful of. These are some of the things that you have to have your head on a swivel for. And I think, look, this is kind of, tooting our own horn, and it's one of the things I liked about you and I working together. It's like, there's just such a combined experience that, one of the big parts for both you and I is making sure, hey, look, we've been down this river. This is a different river for you. But when we were on this particular path or this particular part or stretch, these are the things that we had to be mindful of, because the first time we went down, we weren't. And it was a very, very rough ride. So, for you to be successful, for you to navigate this faster and quicker and better, these are the things you need to be looking for. Let me ask this tough question.
Well, hold on. I got one for you. Back on those points that we're talking about. Have you ever had the experience where an executive coach had to bang you upside the head verbally and wake you up? And how did that feel?
Well, it's me. So everybody in my life has had the opportunity or the desire to do that more than once. Yeah. And this guy Bill did it. There was just something I didn't want to look at. And I don't know why. It was like a concept that I kind of knew to be true, a particular trait, a particular stylistic approach of mine that I knew to be true, but I kept seeing it as an additive or a benefit for me. And he was trying to tell me it's like a derailer, meaning it's one of those things that, it's a good trait, but under stress, it could be a bad trait. And I always wanted to look at it from the positive. And so he literally just closed the book one day. We were going through it was called the Leadership Circle, that assessment tool. He just closed the book for a second. And he said, if you're unwilling to look at every single thing, he said, all we're doing is closing off 2 blind spots and leaving 3 open. And all of them are lethal to your career as you go along. Now, do you either want to tackle getting better on the whole, or did you just bring me on board to do this part or that part? And he just presented me with the options. But it was...
Water
he doesn't do anything he doesn't do anything in a real firm tone. He knew that I was very analytical and that getting out of my head was the big thing. That, my head is always spinning a million miles an hour. And what he wanted to do was say, okay, here's some more data to throw in that mix. You analyze this problem and tell me what the right answer is. And really quickly, I kind of slammed on the brakes. I said, you know what? This is an investment in myself. I'm going to look at it all and do what I can. I want to ask you the flip side of the question, Tom. When we talk about what's a good coach, and this podcast going a little bit longer, but this is a big topic because the impact of a great coach, we see it at all kinds of sports, and we don't often talk about it in the corporate world, but an executive coach can make all the difference of the world of you either hitting the Peter principle or recognizing your potential and impacting even more. But on the flip side of a good coach, have you seen a bad coach?
Yeah, I said earlier, I don't know if I have a collection of bad coaches. I have, people I wouldn't use again. I've seen bad coaching interventions, George, where either the person was unwilling to really work the process and they went into it knowing they weren't going to, and they entered into it, either fooling us or fooling themselves, but ultimately fooling themselves. And the good coaches, figure that out right away, and they throw the cold water and say, I'm not doing this. So certainly have seen coaching interventions go wrong because the candidate wasn't willing to engage in the whole process, just like the one you described. If you had rejected Bill's counsel to look at all of the blind spots and go deep into the analytics of what makes you tick, he was willing to say good luck, which I think is the right perspective. And, that's coaching. He literally coached you. Now, some might say manipulated, but that's not what he did, because he didn't advantage him in any way. He literally coached you to widen your aperture and at least consider taking in the rest of the data, which you did, and that led the process forward. I think where I've seen, and this has not been necessarily me setting something up, it's when I've met an executive, when I've come into a company or I'm working in a company and I find out someone's working with a coach and they've been working with them for 5 years. I think there's a danger of, coaching isn't therapy. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not trained in Freudian, Jungian, behavioral, cognitive. I do not have the clinical hours, the clinical background to be a certified therapist. I could go back and do that, but it's a lot of work. I'm a PhD IO psychologist, org behavior, leadership, motivation, morale, systems thinking. That's what I banked my career on. Executive coaching has sort of come through, as I said in earlier podcasts, through my experience doing assessments. I've done thousands of assessments and feedback sessions and development plans and ongoing coaching. What I will say about bad coaching is when the coach becomes a therapist and they're just sort of enabling the person along without a real focus on change or a milestone for what should be achieved or changed. I just like having the person around and that, there's someone to bounce things off of. That's more of a mentoring relationship, and that can be very positive, but it also can, I think, become, the couple times I've seen this, almost a codependency where the executive doesn't feel they can make a call or make a decision without input from their mentor / coach. And look, we don't have a live audience, so, this could be something we could debate, coach, mentor, what's the difference? But my opinion, my experience that when the coach stays on too long, they're less of a coach and they become more of a mentor, sort of guide, therapist person. And I don't know if that's healthy to go that long with the same person. And I guess, what do you think? I think bad coaches don't get results. Plain and simple, if I were to boil it down, bad coaches, whether they use data or not, they don't enter into the process the right way. They don't get the trust and the buy-in. I don't know how they make money or how they keep their job, but they don't get actual behavior change. They have a few nice discussions. They tell the organization, this is what I've observed, but nothing really ever gets better or improved. And look, I say better and improve, and a listener might imply, well, then you're just talking about reclamations. No, I'm talking about the high potential, right? I didn't bring in an executive coach to make sure my high potential stays a high potential and bubbled into their current formula or formulation. I want that leader to change and grow, improve and get better. Otherwise, why are we doing this? And so I think bad coaches don't get people to make the thought, behavior, attitude, leadership style changes that you're hoping they can make. And again, that goes back to an earlier comment. That may not be the coach. It could be the fit. And you just didn't do a good job evaluating the fit between and giving that person an option. We often, if I had the opportunity, I would let my executives at these companies I've worked at interview with one or two coaches, and then they could make the choice.
So I'm going to make a comment on the only bad coach I've seen. He actually wasn't a coach. He called himself a coach, but he was actually a trainer. Meaning they came in with this, hey, here's the playbook. This is what you need to be doing in this role. Completely ignored the environmental conditions, that this leader was working with. And I remember it was a coach for an executive, and I had to pull the coach aside and I said, you're not doing this person a lick of good by telling them how to do things. You're just one more person in their environment that's handing them a shit list of things to do. But since I know, we're getting close to, time, there's two things I wanted to cover. Number one was to ask you about the process, but then to kind of wrap it up and say, give the HR professionals out there advice on how they could introduce executive coaching to their leadership team, because there's a lot of us like you and I, they're going to say, yeah, what if I have the opportunity for my company to get me a coach, I want it. Because anything I can do to bring my game up 2%, 3%, that's an enormous advantage for my team and my company and for me on the whole. So I'm going to do it. But many times we all know that executives are the last people to reach out and say, hey, I want a coach or I need a coach. So I did want to wrap with that to give your advice to HR professionals out there. But if you could walk us through, kind of a thumbnail basic process of like, if you're going to walk in and you've got an executive, not a reclamation, but it's a high potential, somebody that we know can be driving a lot more impact than they are. Where do you start?
My process is going to start sort of with contracting with that person in terms of how we're going to enter into this, how I'm going to get to learn them, usually, with some assessment tools and some interview time. May even ask, hey, it might be good for me, given where you're at in your career, to just watch you in a team meeting, just see how you operate with either your colleagues or your team itself. We're definitely going to start with data, and that everything we talk about, including the assessment data itself, specific responses and answers to questions, remains confidential. But your company's investing in you because they believe in you. So one of the things I want to be able to do is share your overall summary results and development plan with your leader, because if your manager isn't invested in this with you, then I haven't done my job. And you don't have a everyday partner who's in your corner watching you grow and develop. And some of these development things, a lot of them should be experiential, not necessarily a book or a movie or a training course or an article or a podcast. They're going to be experiential, and that's going to be really facilitated by the company, not me, but I'll certainly characterize what sorts of things would work for you. So having an upfront agreement and how you want to do the coaching process, and honestly, upfront having an exit process, knowing when it's time to say, hey, I think the work here is done. I'll check in, maybe it's a 6-month to 12-month intervention. Could be monthly or biweekly to start, then monthly, George. And then it's, I think we've reached where we need to go. Why don't I check in 6 months? Or the momentum is still building. There's still change happening depending on, sort of the gap analysis that comes out of the assessment data and that continuous learning process I talked about over the 6 to 12 month period. That could be shortened as well to, 3 to 6 months with more intensive coaching on a weekly basis. Maybe even a every other day check-in, because you're really trying to ramp someone up into a stretch role and they just really need that, accelerant to get past we talked about this in a previous podcast, they're on the bleeding edge of success and failure. And as a coach, you want to, this was a stretch role based on working with the organization and the head of HR, whoever brought you in, and working with that person's manager. You want to make sure they don't fall on the failure side of that bleeding edge. So you might do an accelerated process. It's not a reclamation, it's an accelerated high potential process. And so you're there more often. But I would definitely have that contracting component. How do I get my understanding of the person? If I was hiring executive coaches, I'd want to hear their process and how they understand the individual. How do they create change? I'd talk through my approach using the data and the coaching process. And then how do we exit? How do we know that the development plan has got momentum and I'm no longer needed for regular intervention, but I'm here on call for, follow-up, refinement. It's a little bit like working out, right? Once you get your training program in place and you've got your fitness level in the right place, maybe it's only a check-in with a trainer because you're now able to self-sustain your program. So I think that's how I would do it, George. In terms of introducing coaching to a company that hasn't had coaches, one of the things is be credible and have used a coach before. I think that's one way. The other thing, and this goes pretty much in any HR area where, the exception of probably an HRS, where it's new to the company, I love a pilot. I don't know why more HR executives don't utilize the pilot to see, hey, let's see if this works, see if this has legs in our company, and pick a high potential. Don't pick a reclamation to first test out coaching, because the reclamation by definition is you're dealing with someone who has some obstinance to change. Otherwise, you as a company would have gotten it done. Start with a solid citizen. Doesn't have to be a high potential. Introduce the coaching with them and let that be a way of showing folks that this can be an effective process, and talk about your own experience with coaching and not be someone who just prescribes medicine, but you actually take the medicine.
Tom, one of the things that when I was chatting with a few CHROs is I said, there's this great big spend on culture, climate surveys, leadership development, LMS. It's been my experience, and you tell me if I'm wrong, we don't set aside money and investment in our executives, which are the drivers of the results of the culture survey, of your productivity, of your sales, of your R&D. It's that talent. Why? And we've talked about it since we wrote the book. It's what the talent war group is all about, is the talent makes a difference. You can't, if you're an HR professional in any organization, think, despite what it looks like, that your execs have it all figured out and that you can't improve. If you're doing leadership development, if you have a mentorship program in your company, you should probably ask yourself why you don't employ executive coaches. And so my advice to a lot of my HR counterparts would be, look at coaching. Look what you could gain. Things may be going great. And that's even the best time, because, trying to do it when when a crisis occurs or calamity occurs or culture's going down or attrition's going up, you're behind the curve on that one. So when you have the opportunity to look and pilot an executive coach, if you're a new HR senior leader, you should bring them in, and you should be looking for those things that we talked about. Tom, I think we covered this pretty well, but I wanted to know what your kind of bring home thoughts were when it comes to coaching.
What you just brought up is a great bring home thought, because I hadn't been thinking about it leading into the podcast or during this, but it's something that came up in my previous CHRO role, which is we'll spend millions on technology, reward and recognition programs, comp studies, HRS is I love Workday success factors, but what does it take to implement those and maintain those on an annual basis for a 3 to 5 to 10,000 person company in seats? It's a lot of money. The best companies have set aside funds for leadership development, but I bet you most of us are often faced with going to the CEO or the CFO and saying, hey, I'd like to do X around leadership development. I'd like to try this executive coaching with our high potentials that we identified through our succession planning. I've got a set of coaches lined up. Here's the money, but there's no budget. It's a matter of, and the way I've done it, George, is I've gotten it through the business unit. The business unit leaders are often, I don't want to say easier, but the conversation and value proposition to them spending money on their high potential executives to get developed, whether it's through coaching or something else, is just been easier than going to the CEO or the CFO with a large number around leadership development. And so I think, to get one coach in is not so hard to swallow in terms of a P&L hit. To do it broadly across, we did 200 plus executives at one time at AOL. To do that sort of executive development accelerant, it wasn't inoculation, because each one had a different assessment, readout, different coach for a 9 to 12 month period, and then their business unit could sign up for more. That was about, a culture change and a business model change we're making, and not feeling like our leaders were ready to make a pivot. And we felt this was a way to accelerate that pivot. So the natural, budgeting process often doesn't include these leadership development, executive coaching dollars, but you've got to think ahead as to what the value proposition would be for that. Everyone gets why you have to have an HRS, but it's way more important, way more critical to your strategy to have great leaders. And it's, to me, way better money spent if you can identify the right coaches, find the right fit, have the right process, and have ancillary development things in your company that support, top to bottom leadership development, which is, what we're attempting to do at the Talent War Group in our consulting engagements. We're not coming at it from one thing. We're trying to build an ecosystem of leadership development for our clients. And that's really the mission of our management consulting firm.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. That was the one thing that, you and I've learned, Mike and I've learned, Carly's learned, our time in the military, is they're constantly investing in leadership. And nobody just calls out executive coaching, which is why we wanted to talk about it today. So I hope that everybody found this a little bit beneficial, or a lot beneficial. If you have more questions, you can reach out to Tom at Talent War Group or George at Talent War Group. Follow us on LinkedIn. Certainly visit us at thetalentwargroup.com. We'd love to help. We'd love to advise or point you in the right direction. Not everybody needs executive coaching, but it's one of those things that's kind of near and dear to our hearts because, we talked earlier about hiring. People don't leave bad companies. They leave bad leaders. And that leadership starts from the top. And if you're going to be spending money on leadership development, do not ignore your executives. They live in a fishbowl. They don't know what they don't know. And everybody can get better. And great executive coaches can make an immeasurable difference to the bottom line of your company. And I hope you start looking at it from the new lens that we've kind of presented today. Tom, anything? The last thing I was going to ask you is, do you have a team that you think is going to take the win in the Tour de France? Or do you have a rider you think is going to take it all? It's very, very early in the Tour.
Well, George, Lokar, which you probably don't know, is a Slovenian name. I ride
jersey. Please don't tell me that.
I'm on my third Colnago. So Tadej Pogačar, the defending champion, the 21-year-old phenom from Slovenia, I think is going with his UA team on his Colnago, is going to take the top step of the podium when they ride into Paris 3 weeks from now.
And you think his team's going to take him there?
He proved last year he's got a much stronger team than last year, but he just drafts off of Jumbo-Visma, Ineos Grenadiers, and then kicks their butt up the hill at the end of the mountain stages through the Alps and the double Ventoux. That'll be interesting. Double Ventoux in the heat. I don't know Tadej's staying power in heat, because that's the Massif of, what's the province? I can't remember the province. That mountain is in France, but that's in the lower center of France. Very hot. They're going to do it twice. That stage is in the teens. I can't remember which. It's the 15th stage. That'll be telling. That might be the difference maker in the Tour.
Well, for those of you who don't geek out on cycling or soccer like Tom and I,
who's going to win the Euro Cup?
Not even going there. I haven't quite figured out who's going to take it yet. I'm not really impressed by anybody. I don't think anybody's really got their collective stuff together at this point, to be honest with you. I don't see anybody firing on all cylinders. So I think it's anybody's to take at the moment. But God, for those of you that don't know cycling, I mean, 2,100 miles total, thereabouts, start to finish at the Tour?
Yeah. 2,100 miles, 2,500 miles. A shit ton of climbing. I mean, hundreds of thousands of feet of climbing, narrow French roads, which I've done a couple of times with a friend of mine. So I don't think any of the routes that they're going up, I've gone up before, but they're all super intimidating, because the Alps and the Pyrenees, unlike the Rockies or the Wasatch or the Cascade, they rise up from zero elevation. Here in America, we ride from Texas at about 600 feet. I don't know, you're probably at 1,500 in Austin. We're about 600. We ride to the Colorado Plateau, and by the time we get to Denver, we're at 5,000 feet. So if you're going to, Durango or Vail or Aspen, it's just another 6,000 feet there. In France, in Spain, Italy, when you get to the Alps, they just rise up from the ground, and they may be only 8,000 or 9,000 feet, but to look at them and to think about crossing over them on one of these paseos or côtes or cols, it's super intimidating, George. I mean, it's super intimidating. And the most intimidating part, I mean, the climbs are hard, but the thinking about having to go down at 50, 60 miles per hour, hairpin turns, and hundreds of leather-jacketed motorbikers coming past you, it's pretty intense there in the summer, but it's amazing.
Yeah, the max I've done on a descent is about 56, 57 miles an hour, and I was grateful for carbon brake pads, let's just say that.
Yeah.
But anyway, folks, we really do appreciate you tuning in for another episode of the Talent War podcast. And this one will probably launch past the holiday, but we're coming up on the 4th of July holiday. So
happy 4th, everyone.
Happy 4th,
America.
everyone. Absolutely. Happy Independence Day. Like I said, connect with us at thetalentwargroup.com, Tom at talentwargroup.com, or George, talentwargroup.com, and certainly follow us on LinkedIn. We thank you all very, very much and hope you have a great and productive and kick-ass week. We're out. And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on having a true talent mindset, which is the core belief the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe, and please leave us a kind review. Do connect with Mr. Dr. Tom Lokar and myself, George Randle, on the Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram account. And by all means, send your comments, inquiries, and any ideas for controversial talent, HR-related topics to media@talentwargroup.com. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search and advisory firm with services like talent acquisition, leadership development, seminars, executive coaching. Basically, we work with you to bring talent solutions to business problems. And to get started, visit us at talentwargroup.com.